my mother ended up reading it to me. I'd go home at night and we'd read like a chapter a night. And I fell in love with the story. I fell in love with Atticus and the way he treated the children. I'd never been exposed to anything like that before. I thought that it was, at the time as a younger person, I thought that it was Atticus that was just different. And it turns out I was right about the fact that Atticus is different, but then I realized it was just a different world than anything I'd ever known.
Because it is a classic. It's a timeless story, I think. I think there's issues in the play that are still dealt with today, and everyone can relate to it on some level.
The world that the novel has and just the attention to detail that they have to the characters and the climate of Maycomb is very different from my initial experiences with the novel itself. I think that, with all the details that it offers, it really allows me to get an honest view of everyone.
The cool thing about this process is that we actually get to go down to Monroeville in Alabama to the original courtroom that the story is based on. We're going to be rehearsing some scenes in the courtroom and visiting the town. We're also going to Birmingham, looking at some civil rights history. So it's going to be a very, very cool trip and process to really help us bring life to the show and these characters.
Well, coming in, you really got a sense of the atmosphere because there's the whole rural Alabama with these great big open fields and the red dirt and old rundown homes and the tall trees was really, really cool to see. Like coming in on these back roads was really interesting to see little almost snippets taken out of time. I think for me it really hit when we came in and we saw the old-fashioned water tower that said Monroeville across it. That we were really there and really doing it and everything was gonna happen. Like we were there, we were doing it. And then just that night going to the Hibbert house and talking with them and eating the food, which was delicious, and just being in that house, it was really like an odd, eerie feeling because there was so much that happened there, and Harper Lee and Truman Capote had been there, actually there. And it was great just stepping outside and smelling the air, like smelling the pine. Like that's something I never really thought about with really associating this story, was that they have pine trees. It really is something that helped because like you get like all those senses to the place where it was taking place, like the smells, the breeze, the sounds, all this stuff, like to where it actually took place.
We met the perfect Southern woman named Catherine. When I met Catherine, it was like right away I was drawn to her because I could just, she was like the first really outgoing, like I knew we were gonna like get to intimately talk with her, and we hadn't gotten to do that with a lot of the women in Monroeville. She was the epitome of a Southern woman. I was just like, well, where do we begin? So I'm like, okay, can you, in a few words or phrases, tell me what you think the epitome of a Southern woman is? And the first thing that came out of her mouth was, God bless you. And I thought that was pretty appropriate, and it was really funny. But I was like, thank you. I was like, I'm just curious. And she started to laugh a little bit, and some things that stuck out is she said, one of the first things she said is they were very eccentric. And I think especially with my character it makes sense because Miss Stephanie, I think, acts like she is this normal Southern belle, but she's got definitely a lot of fire and things that I think really are intriguing about her. And I definitely think since she's such a storyteller and a fibber and a liar and a gossiper, she's definitely eccentric for sure.
Just being there, coincidentally being in the back room where I would assume that the African Americans or the servants would be, was different. And I said before in our interview when we came back, and I'll say it again, that just being among everyone who was kind of conversing and having a good time, I felt like what a black person would feel like in 1935, just in terms of like not getting the attention or trying to get involved in the conversation, but not really having that opportunity to kind of divulge myself in. And so It was different. And then just relating to people in the atmosphere, the piano, the person that sat on the piano very perfectly. Everything was just very surreal. And even the night there it was peaceful, but it was really dark. And the stars were very clear, but just the darkness that was associated with night there was just kind of like a black hole, I would think, almost.
Hayward House was amazing. I love the design of it and how each room has at least 2 walls that are open to outside. I think that's just really cool, and just to know that so many people have been in there for parties, and so many people have just lived in that house and breathed in the air that we were breathing in and eating the food that we had eaten. And I think it was just really kind of takes you back as you were driving up to the house and going in and meeting everybody. It was really, really cool.
It's really interesting there was a presence there. For me, it was just seeing how, I guess that was the first time I'd noticed how large the difference was in the lives of people that lead a life here versus a person that lives a life in the deep South. I'm from Lexington, and I've always considered that a part of the South. I've always considered myself a Southern man, but I'm realizing now more and more that I'm not, in the terms of what a Southern person is. Deep South. I think that's what the term means. I understand it now.
You know what that song is?
What is it?
Basin Street is the street where the ugly always meet. Everyone you'll never know how nice it seems or just how much it really means. Yes,
Coming into Monroeville, one thing into the main square of town that really caught me was that the way that main stretch is with the courthouse and the jail and where you would hypothetically put the Finch home and Dill's Aunt Rachel's and Mrs. DeBose and all the neighbor ladies, Maudie Atkinson, Stephanie Crawford, is that if you line that up with the actual Monroeville, it's like perfect, like where the courthouse is in relation to where her house would have been. So there was something like with all these old style storefronts. A lot of them had new stores in them anyway, but they still had like the old painting of what they were at one time up on their storefronts, and that was really cool. It really was like stepping back in time for a second. And I think because it really is so isolated, because it's about, I read that it's 2 hours away from any major city. So it really is out of the way, in the middle of nowhere. And just this slice of timeless, the slice of a timeless culture is still there. And you still, like, especially the courthouse, that is like in a vacuum in its own. There's no, it's exactly like I would imagine it, like in the middle of 1935, standing there towering over the town of Monroeville or of Macomb County.
Going to the courthouse was definitely the highlight of the trip for me. Going in that courtroom and rehearsing the scene, the trial, it was very overwhelming. It was very powerful, more so than I could have imagined.
Courtroom scene, because it was really cool to actually go to the actual courtroom and perform it there.
I think it was really interesting. I noticed that when you sit in the witness chair, it really is like they're all around you, coming in from every side, and it's just really intimidating. I mean, you're sitting there, you've got people up in the balconies, and you've got people all in front of you, and of course you got people interrogating you and a judge sitting right behind you.
I first got on the stand and I stood out, and you could see just everyone just was like staring at you. It kind of like, it's like, man, it's all eyes on you. It's kind of like when you're in the theater, but except you can't see anyone in the theater, so the pressure's not as big because the lights are on you. But when you're in the court, it's just everyone can see you and you can see them. So like, it's just like, oh man, the pressure. So like, it's kind of cool to take what I felt there and apply it to here, and just kind of think about the pressure that was there.
And I noticed that when we got up there, you really couldn't see very well. It was not made for comfort, and that's because they didn't really care how the black people felt up there. They were just, oh, you know, we'll build a section for them. We don't want to have to get near them. And I found that really interesting, and I loved how when we put that together, it looked like it could have happened back then.
Having the opportunity to kind of walk around in the courthouse, it was really surreal. It really just caught me off guard that it affected me the way it did, because just being there where actual cases, court cases, were when black men were falsely accused of rape or whatever instance, and in most cases being sentenced to death or murdered, it was really hard for me to be there. And I don't know if that's because it was my connection with my ancestors, or just being able to empathize with having a husband or a brother or a father who was at the wrong place in the wrong time, and that eventually led to his death.
And to see just how the room is structured, it's a giant circle, so it's like no matter where anybody's sitting, their eyes are on you. And it was just, I mean, for me, the first thing I did is I walked in, I didn't say a word, I just walked in and sat down in where the defense attorney would sit. And I just sat there and just took it all in. And it was just phenomenal.
Gentlemen, this is not a difficult case. It requires no minute stifling of complicated facts. This case is as simple as black and white.
This building was built in 1903. Now, what you probably don't know is that 30 years later, in 1933, a white woman in Monroe accused a black man of raping her.
We went to the Civil Rights Institute in Birmingham on Sunday, and that was another thing that affected us all a little bit more than I think we thought it would. I really didn't know how I was going to respond to it, and we all responded in different ways.
So the Institute itself, which is overwhelming to anyone, no matter what race and age.
I really got hit with that. I actually started crying around the point with, it was the freedom buses.
What I loved and appreciated most about it is it was the final checking point to the realization of we're still in this right now. This is not something that happened 200 years ago. This happened in the 30s, this happened in the 60s. It's happening today. This hate, this discrimination, this segregation, it's alive and breathing today. And that was what was most important to me about it.
I think it was Mike I was talking to, or he was talking about how we went to the room and there was just a TV there, and like we were all just sitting there watching the movie, like, okay, all right, we're watching the movie. You know, like it wasn't the most interesting film, but I mean it was not a documentary, but one of those informational kind of like History Channel type things that they made you watch in school. So you're kind of like, all right, cool. And then the screen goes up, and then like you're in the world, so it's kind of like a boom, like a time warp. Like, oh man, we're stepping back into it. And the first thing you see is the sinks, how the different sinks, and like right when you see that, you're like, it kind of gets you ready for what you're about to see through the whole thing, because you're just like, all right, well, this is the first thing I see. It's probably going to show me all the differences. So you're going through, and I'm looking, and I'm seeing the difference between the black classrooms and the white classrooms, and they have the buses where only whites were supposed to sit, and like it made me think, like, I mean, I'm highly blessed.
I was like, oh, this is going to be really interesting. I'm going to see things and everything. And I found myself starting to get really, like, emotionally upset. And I started to kind of tear up, and then I kept walking further, looking at stuff. And what triggered me was they had a white classroom and a black classroom. They had like a set, white and black. And it was so interesting and essentially terrible that the white classroom was very clean, and there were nice portraits and pictures, and they had nice desks. And then you went next to it, and it was the black, and they had rickety, old, gross desks, and everything was like dark and old, and it looked like everything was already used, and it was just like thrown at them. They got the leftovers of what was left. And at that point, I started to like uncontrollably cry.
I think it was a really good way to end the trip because it was not surreal, but it made you kind of get back into this isn't really a story, this is real life. And being across from the 16th Street Baptist Church, that was really just kind of, wow, you were right in front of where that bombing happened. And then as you got into the Civil Rights Museum, and they took you through a timeline of how the events happened. And some of it I've heard about, but actually going there and seeing and just kind of like, wow, this is real. This isn't just a story made up in somebody's book. It's really happening.
We use plays like To Kill a Mockingbird to expose the terrible reality that we once lived in or we may live in now. And it's funny because before I went to Birmingham, I remember we had the interview and you asked me if I felt like there was racism, if racism still existed, and I kind of said something along the lines of I gave people the benefit of the doubt. And coming back from Birmingham, my opinion has changed.
You go all the way through this civil rights movement within a few hours, and it's just so powerful to see. You know, you hear so many facts when you're in school learning about Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and all these people, Rosa Parks, who were so involved in this movement. But then when you see physical evidence of their struggle, physical representations of numbers of blacks versus whites, it hits you like a ton of bricks. When you're reading all this information about the bombing at the 16th Street Baptist Church, and you look up out the window, and there it is, right in front of you. It's like you're not in a museum anymore. You're in a reality.
It made it real. Meeting real people made the character real for me. And it wasn't just my imagination that had a hand in it, because I know this is an actual person who I touched and I heard, and I could, if I wanted to, I could remember their smell. Having that is something that if you have an opportunity as an actor or actress, depending on what school you're from, having that opportunity to really have an interaction with someone who you eventually will be portraying, it's crazy the type of impact that it can have and how it translates to the audience and even to others, because it is so real. It's so real it's uncomfortable, but at the same time it's so real that it's natural, because you don't have to think about what would this person do, because you know it's there. This is who that person is. I don't have to think about things to piece together to make a person. It's already there for me. The work is already done. And because the work is already done, all I have to do is tap into that. And it's almost like it becomes a part of me. And because my interactions with her became a part of me, it's become more natural, and it's easier for me to tap into that. And it kind of makes the decisions that I make on stage easier.
Getting a grasp on how these people live, how they lived then and how they live now. And I think it made it more relevant for us. Instead of thinking back to 1935, being able to see the town in the present day kept it alive for us.
I think it makes it more real. Like, I know that we were only there for a weekend, but That's all it really takes, just for us to see what it's actually like. Like I said before, like you can just have us actors on stage imagining what it would be like, but when you actually take us and put us there, then we know what it's like. So it gives, for the play's sake, it gives us a better show.
The trip helped me be an honest woman, not just a character, Sarah Kenny in an NKU show. After this trip, I felt like I lived in that town. When we came back, I was living in that town, and I knew those people, and I knew things about them that other people didn't know. And I really started to embody to me what a Southern woman was. I took notes on Catherine, the way she was stood, how she presented herself, and I took all that and I'm using it now.
I think it's made it more real for us. I think it's really kind of gave us something to work from and just kind of put us into that place where it feels like it's really happening and it's not just a show. It's real life, and this is our daily lives, and this is what we go through every day.
Now we all have the same image in our minds of the courthouse. We all have the same image in our minds of this main street in Macomb. We all have the same image of the Hibbert House that we can use in building of these characters and of this community.
I got to see where he lived and the house that he lived in, so I could imagine what he had to go through. And that helps me with one of my scenes.
We'll at least be able to see what the world was like if we can't see the exact world that we'll have to be creative. Because I think that's the most important thing we can do, is we have to create the world before we can ever walk around in it.
It's about moving forward, and I think it's a place that we still haven't been able to move forward from, but we're on our way.